Welcome to another episode of the Cynical Writer. Are first drafts always terrible? There's been this notion in the last few decades among writers that first drafts are always terrible, that first drafts always need severe revision. But in reality, this is actually a fairly modern concept. Before the 1980s, for example, most professional writers typed on typewriters. They didn't use word processors or modern computers because they hadn't been invented yet. And typing on typewriters was actually very difficult for writers because you couldn't just make any revision that you wanted to. Making revisions was actually quite hard. If you, for example, misspelled a word on a typewriter, unless you had whiteout, you would have to write the entire page over again. So doing any kind of revision was very difficult. And even with whiteout, it was still very difficult because if you made too many mistakes, then your page would look very messy. So up until very recently, doing any kind of severe revision was extremely difficult. So this whole idea that first drafts are terrible is a fairly modern concept because writers in the past simply didn't have the luxury to rewrite their stories. Now, of course, first drafts always need improvement. However, this notion that a writer has to completely rewrite their story, that's a fairly modern concept. So I think that the whole idea that first drafts are always terrible is frankly a myth. I would say that when I write a first draft, that 90% of the writing is already done at that point. So I mainly just comb for typos. I might fix an awkward sentence every now and then, but for the most part, it's done. Now, I do a lot of rewriting when I'm drafting. I will sit and think about my word choices very carefully before typing anything. A lot of writers don't do that. Now, I will grant you that if a writer just types the first thing that pops out of his head, then yeah, their first draft might be terrible. But for writers who carefully consider, things like word choice and poetic form and all of that, their first drafts probably won't be that bad. So I hope you enjoyed my speech for today. You can check out my work in the description section. And until next time, goodbye.